Hello, everyone. I'm Bandish, the founder of The Curious Mindset. We are a private community for technology leadership teams powered by IT provider 64 Tech. 64 Tech provides IT solutions, but some of the biggest challenges tech leaders face are human challenges, not technology problems. As leaders, there can be pressure to appear all-knowing, which makes it hard to admit what we don't know or ask questions that allow us all to be vulnerable. The Curious Mindset is designed to help us build those essential people and leadership skills that we didn't know we needed. This community grew out of my own desire to help others overcome the challenges I faced when I became a leader. I know firsthand how isolating leadership can be, and our North Star here is that no one leads alone. The mantra of 64 Tech is Together We Grow, and the Curious Mindset is how we can do that. This is a place for us to learn, to share, and become more comfortable as technology leaders. Now, today marks our season finale. We'll be taking a short break and returning with new guests in September. Before we dive into today's session, I want to extend a huge thank you to our incredible host, Jonathan Bowder, for leading us this quarter. Jonathan, you've been an invaluable asset to the Curious Mindset community, and we're so grateful for your dedication and passion to help others. And of course, a massive thank you to our team who work tirelessly in the background, and to you, the Curious Mindsetters, for your incredible support over the past year. Your curiosity and enthusiasm to be better have made this community what it is today. Now, without any more from me, I'll hand over to our host for today's session, Jonathan Bowder, our technology leader co-host, Steve Maxwell, and our very special pirate guest, Alex Barker.
Well, thank you very much, Bandish, for that heartwarming vote of thanks. I'm just starting to get the hang of this hosting malarkey, and it's all finished. So look, I hope our paths cross in the future at some point, but it's been a pleasure and privilege working with this community. And thank you very much for welcoming me with open arms, not just you, but everyone who's on this call and everyone watching afterwards. And it seems like almost 3 long months ago that I positioned the whole idea of a VUCA world and the fact that perhaps our political, economic and business institutions, which were dreamed up largely by Victorian men, were not fit for purpose in a hyper-connected world, which is facing unprecedented headwinds and also unprecedented tailwinds as well. This wasn't about dooming, but it was just calling out the fact that the world we live in is incredibly different and ripe for the kind of extraordinary leadership that this community is committed to. And the other part that we did in that introduction was we looked at a data-driven way to really show up with the one leadership skill that is probably more effective than any other in getting results, and that's inspiring and motivating others to high performance. And my provocation was to think of the type of inspiration, this is all backed up by data, that aligns best with your personality. Then Anthony Aarons took us through a very compelling chunk on deciding in a VUCA world. If you'll recall, Anthony's thesis is that decision-making stalls or at the very best slows down in a VUCA world. How do we overcome that? We build a brains trust of ego-free, brilliant comrades who are all committed to something bigger than themselves. Now, that's easier said than done. So we brought in Peter Docker. Peter's piece around empowering in a VUCA world, it's about releasing the collective genius of that brains trust by actually standing for something and also having a credo that unites the team as well. And the red thread going on to Jason Pfeiffer's session around adapting is we're often facing real challenges in making that happen. So his whole thing is rather than thinking about change as a reaction, let's put a stake in the ground and actually change ourselves before change does its thing to us. And I am delighted by the fact that we are wrapping this series in the presence of Alex Barker. Alex's headline is Rebelling in a VUCA World, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you back, Alex. For people who haven't met Alex before, Alex is an author, Alex is a speaker, Alex is a leadership expert, and from the experiences that we've had with her in the Curious Mindset Towers prepping for this, an absolute visionary as well. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
Thank you for that intro. I'm great. I'm very happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, we're happy to have you back. And I think maybe 20% of us were there for your previous fireside chat at the back end of 2022. And if we go full circle to the start of this VUCA series, we were actually talking about how disconnected leaders are from the problems that they're trying to solve at a global level, in sort of political hotspots, but also in a corporate context as well. And from reading your bio, I think you arrived at a similar conclusion. As a way of introducing yourself, can you just talk us through your career and how you got to that stasis of thinking there is that huge disconnect between leaders and the problems they're trying to solve, and I'm going to actually do something about it?
Yes. So to do that, I'm going to just go back even a little bit further, because I think all the work that I do is about getting people to think about what the rules are that they're following and which ones they've inherited and which ones should be followed or broken. And so I think it's really interesting to trace back your own sort of history and how did you come to have the mindset that you do when you start to go into a career. And I think, for context, I grew up in Buckinghamshire, just outside of London, and it's an area with very competitive schooling. You know, we have to pass the 11 plus.
Right.
And it's an environment where, I mean, my parents were great. They were not, pushy or anything, but you're very much conditioned to tick certain boxes. Everybody does lots of extracurricular stuff, and there's a sense that there's a ladder to climb. And it's quite almost not easy to climb, but there's a very, very clear linear process to it. You know, you do an exam each year and it gets you that little bit further. And you go into university and it's broadly the same. And then obviously I came out of university into a recession. And it was the first time that system sort of collapsed for me, where I didn't have a clear sense, it felt VUCA. It was like, what's going on? Where do I go from here? And my generalist skills were not very important and not very valued to anyone. So I had a bit of a humbling in a way. But also what I learned in that, well, I didn't really learn it then, but I've now reflected upon, is the fact that nothing in my schooling or my upbringing really taught me to challenge or change the system. Everything that I was taught to do was follow the rules, and because it will get you far, it will lead to success. And the only tool in my toolbox that I knew how to approach a situation where you have a global recession caused by a banking crisis was optimize myself, i.e. work even harder, and then you'll be able to beat the system. And it's like running up a treadmill, right? I could never beat a system that's rigged against you. In the same way, the housing system's rigged against a lot of people now, well, in London at least. So I felt like I didn't have those skills or those tools, and I didn't even think that was something I should be doing, because I'd never been taught that. I think that's a massive downfall of the education that a lot of people who are considered incredibly smart in the world get. Like, you can go to the best universities, but if you don't have a mechanism that really pushes for critical thinking, and not just critical thinking in an academic sense, but in a real world context, then we're selling people short on that front. So basically I came out and was like, oh, what do I do? And I ended up doing a lot of unpaid internships, and I'm not complaining about that, because I'm quite privileged, and I was lucky to be able to do that, and I did learn a lot from it. And one of the key moments was I worked for a international development campaign called it's now called Global Citizen, but it was called Global Poverty Project back then. And it was kind of a startup in the UK. It was an Australian campaign that came over, and they really wanted to challenge the narrative on poverty. So they kind of were anti-poverty porn. They were very much like moving from sympathy to empathy. And they educated me on so many like systemic things that I didn't understand, like vulture funds that basically buy foreign debt and then try and sue the countries that have accrued the debt, and they buy it at really low price. And probably people here know this, but that was revolutionary to me. I didn't understand. I just thought countries are poor because of their own fault, probably at that point, but I didn't understand that there was a system that was going on. And so I was 20 years old, and that was just revolutionary to me. And I think none of this really, I didn't do anything about any of these things at the time, but they all started to stack up in a way that was pushing me towards a trajectory, I think. But then I also went to work, because the first real job that I got was working in a mental health charity, really on the front line. I was like the office administrator, and I worked with people who had really severe mental health problems and and learning disabilities, and basically managed a lot of the social workers and a system that brought in new social workers and everything. And that was like, you know, really a real eye-opener of like frontline work. How does the funding systems work? How are these people actually living and existing day to day? And again, it was something I'd have no contact with up until then. And I remember a friend who'd done my master's with me, who'd gone into the Foreign Office, and he said, you know, I'm in the ivory tower and you're sort of at the coalface. And I remember thinking, you know, God, a bit of an idiot. But again, it was just a moment of, as you just said, Jonathan, the sense of like where the disconnect from people who are somewhere making a decision, and what it looks like on the receiving end of it. Like what was the receiving end of the policies in the kind of social care sector? I could really see them all playing out. The problem with short-term contracts, with private companies putting in like supplying social care workers at short-term notice. So unbeneficial for the people receiving the services. So all those sorts of things. And then I eventually ended up in a think tank, the RSA, which was where I thought I should go. And it was, I mean, the people who worked there were amazing, really smart, motivated people who wanted to change things. And I enjoyed it, but over time, something niggled at me. It was like we were less than the sum of our parts in that place. Everybody really wanted to make a difference, and yet it didn't feel like we were having any impact at all. We were churning out reports and reports and reports on what was going wrong, but actually in all the areas where we were trying to have impact, things were just getting worse, like statistically. So I felt like, what are we doing? You know, what are we really doing here? And is this kind of wasted talent? And then there was so much red tape as well around what we could and couldn't do, which was, you know, imposed by leadership. Like I couldn't, you know, as I was communications manager, I couldn't write copy on the website here because that's not where we do that. And there was one moment I really remember in sort of near when I was just at the cusp of leaving, really. We had renovated the building and created all these new spaces to bring members in so that they could connect and think about, you know, come up with ideas for social change. And we all collectively as staff really wanted to have this event called Radical Fridays, where we could take topics that were not allowed on the main stage in the events area because they were a little bit controversial or just felt too radical for, and things like it was around Brexit, things like xenophobia, you know, we wanted to be able to talk about that.
Right.
And I remember I left before everyone was agreed on the idea. I left before it came into fruition. And then I went back a year later and saw that it had become just Friday conversation. So they completely taken the radical out. And I thought, that's just typical. That was, you know, the level, you know, so much fear of something that is not really that big a deal in the scope of things could really lead to some fruitful conversations. And I think part of that was because we didn't have the skill set to be able to manage that kind of difficulty. But anyway, and so all of this stacked up into not me joining Be More Pirate, me kind of burning myself out and then taking a break because I felt like I was really, really, really far off course from where I thought I should be. I was just like, I don't know where my life has gone, but this is not the direction that I wanted to go in at all. And I need to just reconfigure things.
Wow. Wow. So look, you slowly come to the conclusion that the system as a whole is utterly banjaxed. The care system's banjaxed. The finance system's banjaxed. The political system's on its knees as well. What can I do? I can join the RSA. I can be a force for good, but that has the opposite effect. I love your idea of reverse synergy. You're actually less than the sum of your parts, which is fascinating in a slightly warped way. And something that you mentioned, Jason Pfeiffer talked a lot about 2 weeks ago, Alex, that organizations start off with a creative and brilliant idea, and then over time they become efficiency machines, and all of the creativity is bled out of them. So your experience there is a very valid build for the people on this call. So thank you for sharing that. Also, what you said about the fact that you had an internal tape or a belief system that if I follow this path, then X, Y, and Z will actually happen, and the fact that things didn't turn out like that is really, really fascinating as well. So you've reached this hiatus. You've almost checked out. Nothing's working. How did you then channel your righteous indignation, your frustration, all of the things that you beautifully brought to life into something radical and useful?
I'd first say, to be really frank with everyone, because frankness is part of being more pirate, I always tell the truth. I didn't do anything. I went and had a sabbatical. So I sat on a beach for 2 months, truthfully. But this was important because that allowed me to hear my own voice again, because otherwise the world just drowns out your own voice.
Right.
So I had some space to actually listen to what I really wanted, or what felt like an internal desire or motivation that had always been there, but had, for whatever reason, been sort of co-opted. And I remember, when I first came across Be More, I downloaded Be More Pirate onto my Kindle along with like 40 other different books, because I was so chaotic at the time. I didn't know where to turn. So I just was like, I'll read everything that I can get my hands on. And obviously Be More Pirate appealed to me, but I read 3 pages and I sort of put it down because I felt like it was about changing the world. Like the first 3 pages of the book, if you've read it, you're like, it's like, this is about a big revolution. And I thought, I haven't got the energy for this. In fact, I'd also just given up. I was cynical about the social change industry, and I had no concept that Sam would be any different to that. I just thought, here's another guy who's got a great marketing concept for his book. And also Sam had come to speak at the RSA, which I think made my cynicism double down on him. So I vaguely remembered that. But then there was a series of conversations I had with people where this kind of fire was like burning in me. Like I feel like I've got to do something. I want to do something. I want to do something meaningful. And I mean, I can only describe it as intuition. I came across, I was looking for new jobs, and I saw the job advert for Right Hand Pirate, and you don't really look away from that. So I read it through and realized it really fitted my skill set. So I applied and came back to interview with Sam. And I think we clicked because I was very guns blazing in my interview. I didn't really hold back on my cynicism about, the social change sector. And I said, I've been in this for 7 years, and unless this is going to be real and authentic and meaningful and put people first, I'm not really interested. And I called him out on some of the things he'd written in the job description around trying to create a global movement and making scale the measure of success, which is actually a chapter he writes in the book, that scale shouldn't be the measure of success. So I pulled up his own argument, and then he was like, oh, this is interesting. And then we just really clicked because it was done in like good humor as well. The challenge was in good humor, and I think that's a really key characteristic of Be More Pirate as well. Like, be a bit cheeky with it, but make sure people know you've got to challenge what they're saying. So that was what happened next. And he shared with me all the people who'd been inspired by the book and why they were, and that he had this exploding inbox of people with rebellions, and he had no idea what to do with it. And it felt like it could be turned into something really powerful and much bigger than a book, but where and how to manage that and where to go with it, he didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it was the power of the story is so powerful. When I started to read through all the messages from people, I could see that one of the most powerful things is they could see this parallel between where the pirates were in the story that Sam tells in the book and where we are today, where we're facing this VUCA world with all this disruption and these huge, overwhelming, catastrophic problems, potentially climate change, the possibility of robots. We don't know where that's going to go. And the pirates had almost similar levels of disruption, huge amount of international conflict, mass redundancies, and a sense of complete powerlessness. There was this parallel there. And
Yeah, and I want to ask you a little bit more about pirates and piracy in a second, because I have a confession to make. But just to thank you again for validating a red thread that's developed, the importance of actually listening to your inner voice and checking in with yourself, whether that's on a 2-month sabbatical or whether it's ring fencing an hour on a Friday afternoon, standing for something and asking yourself who you are has been pivotal to what all of the speakers have advised us to do. And I'm just glad it had such a profound effect on you and lit the touch paper for that cheeky interview. Now, hand on heart, I'm thinking Somalian pirates, I'm thinking bootlegging, I'm thinking Jack Sparrow, and then you firmly put me to rights, and I had real goosebump moments when you were describing the golden age of piracy. Now, you started that now. Can you just give us a little bit more color? Because I think the parallels are fascinating, but also some of the things we can learn from that 16th century brethren are fascinating as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, what Be More Pirate really does is it invites you into a secret history. It's an unbelievable story. And, I think storytelling is probably the most powerful force in the world. And the most potent ones are the ones where you can see yourself in the story as well. And, the golden age of piracy, which is where you've got all the hard hitters, Blackbeard, the ones that all the Walt Disney stereotypes are based on.
Right.
Like Captain Hook and Jack Sparrow. You had Jack Sparrow's based on Calico Jack Rackham, who was known to be very flamboyant and had an obsession with his own legacy. So there's they've stolen the characters. But in this period, the Golden Age, which is about 1695 to 1725, just like 30 years, but this huge surge of innovation happens because there was this rebellion that took place. And it started with around 300 basically ordinary citizens. I mean, ordinary citizens, working class people, but they were usually highly skilled sailors in the Navy. They'd been in the Navy for a long time, or the merchant or Royal Navy, which was the biggest employer at the time in British Empire. It was, pretty much out exploiting and plundering the world of resources. And these sailors had horrible working conditions, a 40% death rate on board a ship, no guarantee of pay necessarily, particularly in the merchant navies, because they were owned by rich merchants. And so they had, pretty much got fed up, realized that the spoils were never going to come back and line their own pockets. And of course, there is a bridge into this where we had privateering, which was sort of had the seal of approval from Queen Elizabeth I. She sort of allowed a bit of piracy, but it was under the crown. And the Golden Age saw the pirates kind of take the power back for themselves and actually go off and steal on their own. But I want to move away from this idea of them being thieves and murderers, which is, again, the stereotype that we get, because I really want to change the cultural definition of piracy. They were more like social revolutionaries. They were about creating a better life for themselves and therefore a better life for people, a more equal life. And what they did was they had this blank slate, this opportunity to kind of rewrite the rules of the game. So pirate crews completely reversed how they were used to working and living together compared to the Navy. So the first thing was you had real diversity. You had Black pirate captains, you had female pirates, and that was the only place that you'd see a group of people of that kind of level of diversity being able to work as equals, where everybody's skills were valued and you could bring anything to the table, and everyone also had a voice and an ability to influence the decision-making on board a ship. So they had a real democratic process, which was the pirate code eventually, or, the core rules of how you operationalized your values basically were written down into the pirate code, which I'll come back to later. So you had, an equal voice, you had accountable leadership. So captain and a quartermaster were like an equal partnership to counterbalance the idea that, a pirate captain could easily become a tyrant, like many of the Navy captains did. So they put checks and balances on power, which again, we try to do in governments today, it doesn't always work. And they also could vote in and out the leadership. So everyone could basically have a say. If they thought the captain was steering too far off course, he could be reined in. And that was so important. And there's loads of really great historical records of the kind of punishments that they issued for captains that went astray. They'd, maroon them all. They had social insurance system. They had same-sex marriage ceremonies. So you got, there was a recognition of individual liberation and expression in a way that, again, you just could never, this was unheard of on land. It was so radical, so revolutionary at the time, and has been forgotten in history because the establishment wanted to paint them as the bad guys, because there was, very, very dangerous if people wanted to join a pirate crew and have freedom and have equality. So
Right.
they, and this played into two things, right? The establishment were telling us that the pirates are the bad guys, that they're incredibly violent, horrible, murdering thieves, and they're completely immoral. And then the pirates realized they couldn't win that fight, the propaganda fight. So they played into it deliberately. They dressed up in the costumes that we see in fiction. They created the Jolly Roger, which had loads and loads of different variations, in order to sort of strategically tell the story of their violence, in order to instill fear in the enemy, so that every time people came across pirates, they would surrender immediately, which made them, and this is strategic, right? Because they didn't want to waste resources on battle. So they would deliberately terrify people into surrender, and then they could walk on and take what they wanted. So they weren't interested necessarily in violence unless it was absolutely necessary. They were sort of just doing what they had to do to survive. And I don't think that the level of theft that pirates, and I mean, this, you can make up your own mind on this, but this is a degree of historical relativism. The Navy, the establishment, was arguably stealing from everybody, including indigenous nations. So whether we think that was wrong or right, and whether we think the pirates were worse or better, remains for people to make their own mind up. But I just want to share the reality of that story.
Well, look, thank you for doing that. And I think it's very pertinent to today, because that original brethren, that brotherhood and sisterhood, will have been sleepwalking through life. They will have been mid-ranking officers or press gang nobodies and merchant vessels, just as sometimes we're sleepwalking through life. To extend the nautical metaphor, you talk in your work a lot about allowing the tide to carry us. Can you, putting this into a 21st century context, your credo, could you tell us a little bit, and it happened to you as well, you felt that you were coasting as well. Tell us a little bit more about how we can recognize those signs that we're being lived and being swept along, and how we can wake up and actually take back some agency for ourselves.
I think most people know, right, when there's this low-level whisper of sort of unhappiness or comfortable misery, because it's often familiar misery, where you kind of play out the same thing year on year, because at least you know what you're going to get, as opposed to taking a risk and trying something or doing something quite different. And that's obviously the risk that the pirates faced. And I think it's that sense of when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of changing, or doesn't outweigh it, that's when we make a move. I think, I mean, for me, I had very, very clear and obvious symptoms that something was not right with me. But I've noticed, people tell me stories like this all the time. Sometimes there's an event that kind of just pulls the rug from under your feet, and we call it a "no one is coming to save you" moment, where you just realize that actually the things that you've relied upon are very fragile, they're illusionary, and then you're forced to rely on yourself. And then that's quite a liberating moment, because you have to really dig into your internal resources and figure out what they are. We call it like navigating using a compass rather than a map. I mean, I do love the nautical terminology, but it's quite helpful to just think about, like, the map is something that you're given by society. Like, it's a sense of like the road that you can walk, which is external to you. You do university, job, etc. Versus a compass, which is understanding who you are, understanding your skills, your strengths, your weaknesses, your knowledge set, your motivations, your desires. And one thing I'd add to this actually is understanding your energy, like understanding your energy levels, or where you get your energy from. And then navigating using that. So always veering towards the conditions that will fulfill those things for you, rather than a job title or a particular role or a set of particular outcomes. So I think that's sort of one of the starting points is developing your own compass. And we have like little mini challenges and missions we do with people to get them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suppose the second part, and this is really the foundational levels, before I get to the rule breaking parts, which is necessary. Then there's this idea of the pirate code, right? Which is integral to the pirates in the 1600s. Operationalizing your values. So understanding what are my values? What are the principles that I stand for? And making sure that they are original and unique to you. They're not the principles that could basically be applied to anyone, anywhere. Because I think a lot of teams fall into that trap. I see it all the time. They'll two major traps. Either they're too generic, and people are like, this doesn't really feel meaningful to us as a team. It doesn't say anything about us. So we're kind of not inspired by it. And then that's hard to stand by something you're not inspired by. And then the second part is they're generic in how they've been described. And then nobody in the team, or even you can do this for yourself as an individual, understands what they mean in practice. Because an idea of being fair, for example, has no meaning unless you can tell me, what does fair mean to you in your day-to-day life? How do you demonstrate fairness? And I always say this, if you cannot tell me how you demonstrate fairness or whatever the principle is, then it's not real. It's not a code. I need to know how you live it. And this, we play with this. It goes back to the idea that the original pirate codes, if you were found with one, you'd be hanged on the spot by the Navy if you were found. So you have to know it. It has to be lived. It's not a document. It's not a strategy document. It's not, we fall prey to putting our values on our websites and going, job done. It's not that. I think most people instinctively know this, but what I do with Be More Pirates, just push people to really be super clear, super specific, and be accountable to putting them into practice regularly. And that's how you create the trust in the team. So but the foundation is that the code and the values.
Thank you. So I think that's a really, really useful guide on how to know that you're coasting. You kind of know, you're trying to push it to the back of your mind. I love your definition of comfortable misery. So I've woken up from my slumber. I'm starting to play with these tools. I'm starting to contemplate a rebellion or building a band of rebels. But I know that you have very short thrift for people who see themselves as rebels without a cause or disruptors for the sake of disrupting. What's your distinction, please, Alex, between rebelling in a good cause and just rebelling for the bleeps and giggles?
Yeah. I make the distinction between a pirate and a rebel. So don't conflate the two, which often happens. People go, oh, come and talk to us because we're all rebels. For me, rebellion as a rebel as an archetype is, a lone ranger, someone who dislikes authority and kind of, is that the rules are there to be broken phrase that we all hear thrown around. And that is not pirates, because first of all, the pirate rebellion is collective. It's always done in a crew structure. You can't just go rogue. That was the whole idea of the accountable leadership and the decision-making, the democratic decision-making. There are moments when a leader needs to lead the way. For example, in an urgent situation, the captain always had the final say in battle. But as a general principle, the rebellion has to be agreed upon, because also this is, in a sense, common sense. Like anyone can have a harebrained idea and go, right, I want to do something different. But you need a sounding board. You need to say, like, is this a generally agreed upon frustration? And that's what I get in teams. Like, it's usually the stuff that everybody is thinking and nobody is saying, because it's a bit taboo to say. Oh, it can be anything, this budget is not actually realistic. We're being asked to do something quite ridiculous here. I've heard this time and time again. So getting together with the crew and just in the first instance, sharing what is it here that we all agree doesn't work anymore because it's outdated, because we've just been doing it for a long time. I think the articulation of it is actually one of the first and most needed aspects of rebellion. the ability to say the rebellion in a way that doesn't immediately cause more tension and conflict, because that's also what I see happen. First of all, people go there alone, and then I tried to be pirate and then it didn't work. And often they'll say it at the peak moment of frustration. So they'll be in a meeting and they'll go, right, now I want to say the thing that's been on my mind. Usually, if it comes out with all the emotion that you have built up around that issue, the person you're telling it to will feel the emotion and they will shut down immediately, because we're animals at the end of the day. We respond to each other's energy and emotion first. It's really basic. So you cannot get a good outcome in that situation. They'll just think you're attacking them and there's no possibility of a solution. So spend some time with your crew thinking about how you articulate that particular issue. And I always say use curiosity, because we're on the curious mindset, as the guide, because curiosity is an interesting space. Like, it's an openness with curiosity. It's about displaying an openness to alternatives and new solutions. So going in with what could be different here? Like, this doesn't appear to be working, but what could be different? How could we look at this differently? As opposed to here's me laying out everything that's broken. So I think, just spending some time diffusing the emotion and figuring out what's the best way to say it. No workplaces give training on this. I talk about this all the time. They're the amount of manifestos I see that say we want healthy challenge, we want people to we want to have people to be open and challenge each other. Great. But are you giving people the tools and the ability and space to really practice how you do that well in a way that will make you stronger, rather than have people throwing around opinions and disagreeing with each other? And there's two things I want to build on that.
Please.
This really speaks, there's behavioral science behind this stuff. It's not just observations. There's two kind of key books that I refer to when people need a bit of convincing on the idea of challenge and rule breaking. One is Intelligent Disobedience, which is written by a behavioral scientist called Ira Shalef. It's quite old now, but I still think it's useful because it reframes rebellion as a responsible behavior. Because he talks about lots of high risk environments like the military and medicine, and I always bring this in, and I possibly spoke about it last time, but it's worth reiterating that the ability for an individual of maybe lower status in an organization to have the confidence to assert and challenge is critical to safer and better outcomes long term. They have to be able to say to the boss, hey, not sure about your decision here. Have you considered X, Y, Z? And the boss not completely be, flawed by this, or not be completely taboo to say that sort of stuff. So creating space for that practice of intelligent disobedience, and sometimes just allowing people to, if they think that they've understood things, to a deeper degree, being able to just do their own thing. And there's also another book called The Art of Insubordination, which again also talks about, the sort of, so I only read this recently, but one really important thing in the beginning he talks about is how obviously teams that can disagree and have sort of insubordinates in them tend to get better outcomes, because you debate the issue to a much deeper degree if you've got people challenging and scrutinizing all the time. The problem we have is that is a horrible situation to be in if you're in that team and everyone's arguing with each other over something, and nobody wants to stay in that mental and emotional space. We want to get out of it as soon as possible. We're like, oh God, this feels horrible. So we usually shut it down somehow. Either we stop talking, or the boss shuts it down, or whatever it is. But if you can learn to sit with that discomfort of the disagreement, again, which is a skill that you have to practice, and with the awareness that this is a necessary and purposeful part of the process, then in the end you get the better outcome.
Alex, that's so fascinating. If I just do a little bit of a replay, we need to be aware of where we're coasting, where we're in a comfort zone. We need to listen to our inner voice more. We need to take back some agency for ourselves. And then we can't be lone wolves. We need to agree with like-minded people on the thing that doesn't work, but articulate that problem, and also use curiosity as our guide in doing that. But we have to acknowledge that we, as a default, are maybe inelegant and unskilled, and will take false harmony over the very rich nectar that you're positioning as a game changer for organizations. So absolutely fascinating conversation. Before I hand over to Steve Maxwell for his question, can I ask you the one thing question, the reductionist question? If you were to give just one piece of advice to me and the other tech leaders on this call of how to be more pirate, what would that bit of advice be?
I'm going to go rogue and just backtrack once slightly, because there's one important point to make before I say the one thing, which is after you've done the kind of the rule breaking part, the sort of getting into the healthy challenge, the most important part of all of this is to be able to like articulate and action the alternative. Like there's no point in, you know, the Pirate Rebellion is meant to be creative. It's more about the new rules that you're creating. So being able to always come in to challenge with, here is what we think would work better, and working on that, and positioning that. But the problem with that, and this is the one thing that I would say, is most of the time when we're trying to create a new alternative, it's too ambitious and it's too big for the capacities that we have, because in the world we live in right now, we live, you know, the VUCA world is that it's complex, and we've got things pulling our attention all the time, and most people are overwhelmed and they have too many things on their plate. So I always say, like, you've got to find a small, bold action, something that you can do tomorrow to just create momentum for yourself and momentum for your crew. Something that feels interesting, kind of a bit exciting to you, hence the bold. You know, but is a bit easy to do, so that you don't get overwhelmed with like the complexity of it all. But it will stack up eventually to something bigger. And I often say, like, there's different things you can try on this. One of the easiest things that I get people to do in our courses is to just email someone who intimidates you, but who you'd like actually to connect with and have some advice from, because it's you don't know what opportunity will be on the other side of that. We generally ask people to go exploring the edges of their map, and that can be like a series of small, bold actions to just push you into an unknown territory of some kind. It could be talking to someone you've never spoken to before. It can be, sometimes I make people do rejection therapy. So like ask for something that you know you're going to hear no to. And it's all about this whole idea is of the small, bold actions off the edges of your map is about really building the 3 key skills of being more pirate, which is courage, imagination, and closing the gap between our intentions and our principles and action. Just start. Like, if anything, just start.
So just start. And I love the idea of small, bold actions. Big, hairy, audacious goals get all of the airtime, but they can be impractical, overwhelming, and counterproductive. So small, bold actions, and gradually, incrementally exploring the edges of your map and taking control of your compass. Lovely, lovely stuff.